This tutorial will walk you through how to create the double zipper pouch or cosmetic bag. This is a great addition to any large purse or tote bag that you will carry with you to keep you organized. I created this video to show you the technique how I sew my zippers in. I use that technique a lot. The patterns I use that technique on are the April backpack, the Sakura crossbody purse, or the Sweet Pea purse. So if you ever felt that written instructions may not be enough for you, this will provide a visual instructions on how to install the zipper. This is a nice quick project, and the pattern for this pouch is available for free in my Facebook group. The link to the Facebook group is posted in the description box below. When you join the Facebook group, you can retrieve the PDF from the group file folder. Also below it's a link to my Etsy store. You can go and check out all my patterns. Maybe something will catch your eye. For now, let's sew this cute pouch. I hope you're gonna have fun watching the video and making the pouch. If you like what I do, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel. Let's get started. To get us ready to sew up our cosmetic bag, we would need to use the pattern pieces provided. You will print them out and cut all necessary pattern pieces based on the instructions provided. And here is what we would need. We would need a front pocket panel, and that's interface with the Decovil light, the upper front panel, the lining for the pocket, and a zipper. So that's our front. Our back is just a plain panel and two inside lining panels, the main zipper, and a piece of a strap of accent fabric for your wristlet strip. Now that we have everything, we can start with putting our front pocket together. To do that, we will find the middle point on the top of our accent panel. We want to make sure that if you are using directional fabric like I am today, you have it the right way up. So find the center of the fabric panel and mark it. This is a heat erase pen, so it can be erased, but this part actually will not show on the final project, so it can be marked with anything. Then you take your ruler and you will measure 3/4 of an inch down and make a line. That's where we're gonna place our zipper. We're gonna use the shorter zipper for the pocket, and what's very useful with that is double-sided tape. So we want to make sure that our zipper is secured to our front panel. I'm gonna place a piece of tape along the edge of the zipper tape, making sure it sticks. And now flip it over so the teeth side is down and attach it to the upper panel. But before that, we have to find the middle point of our zipper, which is here. Open it back and make sure that our center points match, and we are aligning the zipper with the 3/4 of an inch line. This way we're gonna sew the zipper on, but we want to make sure that we have the measurements correctly. So we want to make sure that we're not going to sew the zipper all the way through. We want to have around ½ inch left on each side. To get that measurement, you can just measure the zipper opening here, which is 3 inches, and transfer that measurement on each side of the central point. And this is where we're gonna make our seam. So sew from that point, backstitch on the beginning of the seam and on the end with 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. After our zipper is sewn into our accent panel, we're gonna take the lining of the packet, find the central mark on the top edge, mark it, and pin or clip the lining to the top edge of the accent panel, right sides together. Now you're gonna take it to the machine and making sure that your lining doesn't shift or fold. You're gonna sew on the interfacing side following the previous created seam. So just sew a second seam on top of the seam that attached the zipper to the main accent panel. So I followed the initial seam, creating a double seam on that side, which attached my lining to the packet panel. Now what we want to do, we want to make angled cuts just up to the first stitch on both sides. Just be careful, do not cut your stitching. This way we can open the lining, flip the zipper, make sure that all the extra fabric is going behind, and take it to the ironing board and iron that in place. You should now have a panel that looks like this with the little triangles. What we want to do, we want to fold our panel, making sure that we are flipping the triangle to the inside of the project, and align the edge with the edge of the zipper and clip that in place. Make sure it folded right when the first stitch of our seam is, and repeat that on the other side. And do the same with the lining panel. Now that we have this prepped, we're gonna take it to the machine and sew from the top to the point where the seam began. Don't sew inside the seam, because you're gonna have a peckering corner. We want to make sure that we are sewing exactly where the seam started. So repeat that on both sides. Now that you have your little triangle sewn in place, you can open both panels, and now you're gonna have your zipper enclosed. Take it to the ironing board and iron it nicely, and then top stitch along the edge with a 1/8 seam allowance and 3.5 stitch length. Now that your zipper is top stitch all around, we're gonna finish up our packet. We're gonna flip the work over, bring the lining up to create the packet, and you want to secure the sides of the lining. And then you can clip the top of the lining to the upper edge of the zipper tape, and you're gonna take it to the machine, and starting with the sides, you're gonna sew the sides close making sure you're not gonna sew in the upper panel. You're gonna do that on both sides, and when that's done, you can base the top of the packet to our outer panel, so everything stays in place when we move on to our next step. Our bottom front packet is prepped. Now we're gonna move on to finishing up our front of the bag. You're gonna take your upper front panel and clip it right sides together to the upper edge of the packet panel. You're gonna take it to the machine and sew it on with the 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. After that's done, you're gonna open the panel, press it, and top stitch it on the waterproof canvas upper panel with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance and 3.5 stitch length. Now that we have our upper panel attached, we can move on to installing the main zipper, and we're gonna repeat the same technique as we used for the small packet. So I have my panel all marked up, the central point and the 3/4 of an inch line below the upper edge. I placed the double-sided tape on my zipper tape, and I marked my zipper, so I have the central line, which I'm gonna align with the center of the upper panel, and I'm gonna attach my zipper along the 3/4 of an inch line. I also marked where my seam has to start and stop. So using the pattern piece, you can transfer the measurement. It's 3.5 inches from the central mark on each side. When you have all of it prepped and ready like this, take it to the machine and stitch from the point to that point with the 1/4 of an inch seam allowance and a regular 2.5 stitch length. Your zipper is on. Now we're gonna attach the lining panel. So take one of the lining panels and attach it to the upper edge, right sides together. Flip the project over, take it to the machine and sew following the just stitched seam. Now that our lining is attached, we're gonna make our cuts. So just make an angled cut to the first stitch, but do not cut any thread. Now you're gonna take your project to the ironing board and you're gonna iron it, flipping the zipper inside and exposing those little triangles. Make sure to insert your zipper pull on before we move on to the next step. Now that our zipper is pressed and it's in the up position, we're gonna finish up our zipper opening. We're gonna repeat what we did with our lower packet. So we're gonna fold the panels, the outside panel and the lining panel, align the edges of the panel with the edge of the zipper and secure it in place. Repeat that on the other side, making sure that all the triangles are inside the project now and are not showing on the right side of the project. So when you have that prepped, you're gonna take it to the machine and you're gonna stitch from the top to the first stitch or the last stitch of the seam and repeat that on both sides. After that's done, you're gonna open the project, press it and top stitch around the zipper with the 1/8 seam allowance and 3.5 stitch length. Our zipper is all done and attached. Now we can move on to our next step, which will be attaching the second lining panel. So what we want to do, we want to take the second lining panel and clip it together with the upper edge, right sides together, and you're gonna take it to the machine and you're gonna baste the lining to the project. So you're gonna baste it to the top edge, leaving around 3/4 of an inch on each side unsewn. This will allow us to finish the sides of the lining, to close it before we attach the main upper panel. So now we have our second lining panel based to our project. And what we want to do, we want to finish up the lining before we attach the back of the back panel. So just pull the sides of the front panel up and secure the lining panels together all around. You also want to mark a 4-inch space on the bottom of the lining to remain unsewn. This will serve as our birding hole, so we will turn our project right side out through that space. So take it to the machine and sew the lining all around except the birding hole with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Bigger seam allowance on the lining will allow the lining to sit nicer inside the back. We have our lining sewn and all around. I left the opening to turn our project right side out. I also trimmed the seam allowances but left them as is where the opening is. Also trim the extra triangles fabric that was left out of creating our zipper opening. When that's all done and ready, we gonna flip our project right side up, take our back of the back panel and place it together, right sides together with our front of the back. Clip it along the top edge and take it to the machine and sew with the 1/4 of an inch seam allowance all the way through. After that, you're gonna open the project and open only the back panel, press it, and top stitch on top of the back panel where the zipper runs. So don't stitch all the way, don't top stitch all the way to the end, just top stitch where the zipper tape is. Now that we have our back of the back panel sewed in and top stitch along the zipper, we're gonna close our back. So what you want to do, you want to flip the back panel on top of the front panel. Both panels should be right sides together. Start clipping the panels together, making sure the lining stays out of the way. So when you have the panel clipped, you're gonna take it to the machine and you're gonna stitch all around the outer panels, making sure your lining stays out of the way of the seam. And also you're gonna start your seam where the top seam is. So start sewing all around with a 3/8 of a seam allowance and finish where the top seam is, making sure your lining stays out of the way of the seam. Our outer panels are sewn together. All we have to do now is to box our corners. So what you're gonna do, you're gonna take a small ruler and a marking tool and mark at 3/4 squares on each corner of the back. After you marked the 3/4 of an inch squares on each corner of the bag, and just a reminder, you measure from the seam line, not from the side of the fabric, so just make sure you do that. After they are marked, you're gonna cut them out. After you have them cut out, we're gonna box our corners by opening the cuts, and you wanna push the seam allowances of the side seam and the bottom seam in the opposite direction. Align the seam and make sure that they meet in the middle, and secure with clips. Now repeat that on all 4 corners. When you're doing it, make sure that the seam allowance is folded in the same direction on both corners. Now that you have all your corners clipped, take it to the machine and sew with a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Now that all your corners are boxed, we can prep our bag to be turned right side out. You would like to clip the little corners up here. Make sure you're not gonna clip the seam. Make sure your zipper is open, and you can start turning your project right side up. Make sure your bag is turned right side out nicely. If you have trouble with poking those corners out, you can use a poking tool that helps with releasing the fabric to have your corners nice and sharp. You can do that, and when you check your bag and you think your bag is up to your satisfaction, all the seams look nice and neat, we're gonna close the lining opening. So you're gonna take your lining out of your bag, you're gonna pull on the open seam. This will make the raw edges of the lining to fold inside. You can press it if you like, or secure it with clips. Take it to the sewing machine and top stitch with the 1/16 of an inch seam allowance to close the opening in the lining. Instead of putting a traditional D-ring top on the side, I decided to do something different, and I want to create a little grommet hole to be able to attach my wristlet strap on the back with. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna measure where I'm gonna put my grommet. I think it's gonna be around 1/2 inch from the side and 3/4 of the inch from the top. So I'm gonna create a hole to be able to install my grommet. I want to make sure that my lining is in place and everything is nice and flat. So my grommet is installed. Now what's left to do is to put our wristlet strap together. So now we're gonna work on our wristlet strap. I ironed the strap to create a 1/2 inch wide strap. So what you're gonna do, you're gonna first fold it in half and press to create the middle crease, then use that to fold the both row edges inside and fold it in half again to hide all the row edges. When you have your strap pressed like that, you're gonna take your swivel clasp, thread it onto the strap, and take your strap and clip it together, the short edges, open the fold and clip the short edges together, right sides together. Take it to the machine and sew with the 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Now that you have those two short edges connected, butterfly the seam allowance. That means open the seam allowances on opposite sides. Refold the strap the way it was ironed. And when you have that ready, refold it, take it to the machine and top stitch all around both long edges with the 1/8 seam allowance and 3.5 stitch length. Now that your strap is top stitched on both sides, align the seam with the loop of the clasp. You can now secure the loop with the rivet or sew on a machine, whatever are your preferences. Now that your strap is completed, you can just clip it on your back and your project is completed.